Alright guys, and welcome to a very different video because today I'm going to be talking about one of my favourite RPG games of all time, The Witcher 1. Now, The Witcher 1 is a bit of a weird game to review and analyse because it's very flawed, but also beautifully enjoyable to play. But why is that? Why do half the people who've played this game hate it and the other half love it? It's basically like a Marmite game. Most people who try out The Witcher get tired of the janky, horrible gameplay pretty quickly, or frustrated with a complicated main storyline that breaks into multiple different storylines, and leaves you sat there wondering, how do I even follow the main storyline? And you just get really lost, and therefore pretty bored. I know this from first-hand experience. This is what happened to me when I first played this game. But if you're persistent, patient and push past all The Witcher 1's flaws, you discover one of the most atmospheric and immersive RPGs you've ever played. And for me personally, it's one of my top 3 RPGs of all time. There are even elements of this game that I prefer over The Witcher 2 and 3. The main issue with The Witcher was that it was originally designed to be a top-down, Diablo-like RPG game. But then they added the behind-your-character camera later in development, but kept in the really awkward gameplay that was, again, designed for a top-down camera view. Geralt automatically does a number of attacks per click, and you have to combo them together. You can't just spam click attack. And dodging in this game feels awful compared to The Witcher 3 and Witcher 2, where it's just better to not dodge, to be honest, in this game, and just juice up on potions, take attacks, and keep spam attacking. It's really not the best combat system I've ever played, but anyway, I don't really want to spend too long talking about that because there are more important things to talk about. So how does The Witcher become so immersive as a game? Well, the game has what I call the vanilla World of Warcraft effect. In vanilla, or any other MMO to be honest, well, most of them anyway, you normally start out with absolutely nothing, right? You get some ragged clothes and a rusty sword to fight with, and you have to invest time into your character for hours upon hours in order to become more powerful. And when you do this, it feels very rewarding because you weren't spoon-fed everything from day one. The Witcher also does this perfectly. Geralt wakes up from an attack on his life with plot-convenient amnesia, with nothing but a white shirt, some ragged pants and a crap sword. You don't even get a silver sword in the beginning of a game. You have to struggle through killing monsters with a steel sword. You truly are at rock bottom, whereas in The Witcher 3 you start off with some good armour and 2 swords. I know it makes sense plot-wise because they couldn't just keep near killing Geralt at the end of every game and giving him amnesia over and over again, but it just doesn't have the same immersive MMO-esque charm of beginning a game at rock bottom because every upgrade feels more impactful and rewarding. Loot is also very limited in The Witcher. It's not like Witcher 3 where you have like swords popping out your ears. It's more realistic in the sense that you wouldn't find chests packed to the brim with swords and armour in a real medieval world. People wouldn't just leave that kind of thing lying around. You'd only be able to get them from a blacksmith or request an order for something to be made. Plus, there weren't just sword shops lying around for anyone to walk into. A blacksmith normally worked for a lord or a baron of the land, and his priority was to make armaments for the army, not make swords for adventurers, because let's be honest, adventurers didn't exist in medieval times. I'm not comparing to The Witcher 3 here. I'm just comparing to, to the average RPG. The Witcher isn't a romantic RPG with adventurers and heroes. You aren't on an adventure, and you aren't a hero in this game. You're a Witcher, and a Witcher has a specific role in this world, which is to kill monsters, get paid, and move on. And this is one of the many ways that The Witcher conveys realism in the game. Now, I'm not dissing typical RPGs where you are an adventurer, you are a hero, you go out, explore the world, kill dragons and get loot and everything like that. That is a fun kind of RPG to play, but what I'm trying to highlight here is how The Witcher is different. It's not that kind of RPG at all. It's much more realistic. It's also realistic in the sense that it is respectful to the hard times of real medieval life. Chapter 1 is set in a medieval hamlet on the outskirts of the city of Zima. It's ugly, it stings, and the residents, on the most part, are unsavoury characters, as you could probably imagine from having such a hard life. You hear people spitting in the street, insulting you as you walk by. It's a foggy, murky, miserable place. and the people reflect that. The Witcher isn't afraid to make a dark and unsettling atmosphere as you progress through the storyline. The Witcher does cities better than any other game too. This also goes for The Witcher 3. On a one-to-one scale, Vizima is as big as a real medieval town, really. Novigrad in The Witcher 3 also, the buildings are big and tower over the player, making you feel like you're actually wandering around the town. Compare this to the supposed cities in Skyrim. They're tiny in comparison, about the size of a village. In fact, they're smaller than my home village. And the buildings are really small as well. They just don't make you feel like you're in a town. They make you feel like you're in a video game because it feels like the developers were limited by technological demands. Probably because games like Skyrim and Oblivion have interactive interiors. Every building you see you can actually go inside, whereas The Witcher can be more lenient with designing a town because they can fill in the space with scenic buildings that you can't actually enter to make the town appear larger. There's also only one town in The Witcher, so developers could focus more on bringing that town to life. They do this by creating diverse environments within Vizima. Near the inn, where the slums are, there's beggars and prostitutes and criminal bases, and, it's muddy, there's puddles, and it's just generally very dirty. Then you've got the non-human district, which is basically a ghetto. The merchant street is kind of fairly normal looking, to be fair. You've also got a rundown chapel in the middle of it all. This really is the peasant and unpleasant area of the city, very akin and realistic to real medieval cities. Then you have a trade district. This is the richer area of the city where the streets, statues and water fountains have their beauty maintained. There's a crypt that has been drastically neglected and now overrun by monsters. And then there's the Old Vizima, which is a district that was presumably destroyed by a war and just hasn't been repaired because the king either couldn't afford it or couldn't be bothered to rebuild it. It's nice to see the realistic effects of war in The Witcher. You see it throughout the entire franchise, like plague, famine, and the desperation of people in response to that war. As a side note, Vizima is notably built near a swamp. This is very realistic to medieval times because kings used to build their castles near natural defences. If you go to York in the UK and walk the old city walls, there's an information plaque that explains how much of the outer walls were intentionally built near a swamp, so that it would be difficult for soldiers to go up to the wall and, climb it. Because obviously they'll be slowed down by the swamp, which gives archers more time to, kill them. Medieval times were hard. They weren't romantic, so you can probably imagine people would be mainly just looking out for themselves. People would be selfish, bitter and hostile to some random dude coming up to them or breaking into their house asking them for information. In games like Skyrim, you talk to people on the large part, they're pretty chill. You can even walk into the house uninvited, basically trespassing, and they're not that fazed. In The Witcher, you have to try a little harder to get people talking. You get people telling you to, piss off and to spit in your face. They'll also only give you information for money or if you get them blind drunk. Yes, you can actually trick people into having a drink with you to get information out of them in this game, which I really love. It's not really seen that in any other video game, and it's very realistic. The only problem with doing this is it leaves Geralt absolutely smashed, and then you have to somehow find your way back to the inn before you pass out in the street. The point I'm trying to make is that this game just oozes realism, and this realism in turn makes the game more atmospheric and immersive. This is also heightened by the music, the dreary dark lighting, environmental design. I mean, you heard the title music in the video intro. Is there really any other better game soundtrack than that? Storyline of The Witcher is also very unique. I won't spoil much, FYI, but playing The Witcher is basically like it's like watching a Sherlock Holmes episode. Your main objective is to investigate the criminal organisation Salamander, who have infiltrated Kaer Morhen to steal Witcher mutagens. When you reach Vizima, the storyline breaks off into multiple different storylines because you're chasing down different leads. It isn't just a simple A to B, follow this quest and Bob's your uncle. It's quite complicated, and for a new player it can be quite overwhelming. I know it was for me, and I just kind of gave up. I'm glad I did go back to play the game and I stuck to it. If you just keep following the trackable quest, you're normally fine. And when you do stick with it, you will appreciate the originality of the quest design. Sometimes you follow leads that are dead ends sometimes. Leads turn into new leads. And it really just feels like you're conducting a fairly realistic investigation, and while you're doing this investigation, multiple new stories begin to reveal themselves. It really isn't just one basic main storyline in this game. There's an objective that Geralt is trying to perform, but he naturally becomes a part of multiple different storylines along the way. You know, we've got the beast terrorising the village in Act 1, the werewolf vigilante moment, Alvin who turns out to be a magic source, curing the princess of a Striga curse once again. There's so much going on in this game. A lot of RPGs like Fable and Mass Effect have a good and evil choice of how you want to complete the main storyline. The Witcher has choices, but none are more evil than the other, really, to be honest. At first you think the path of helping the elves is the good path, but it really isn't, because the Scoia'tael, despite their history of suffering, are still a band of vicious, bitter, murderous elves. I would say the only good character in this game is Siegfried, and it turns out he's actually working for the main antagonist. You also can choose to remain completely neutral and not pick a side in this game, and this is the main underlining theme of the whole Witcher series, Geralt's inner struggle with deciding whether to remain neutral or pick a side. But either way, whatever choice you make in this game, it will make you feel bad for it. Because at first you may think you're doing something good in this game, but then it later turns out the consequences of your actions actually lead into something bad. Sometimes Geralt doesn't pick a side, sometimes he does, but what's consistent is everything normally goes wrong, and the cruelest and most evil people normally end up on top, leaving us to question good and evil and morality in general. I think the striking realisation of playing The Witcher, watching this series or reading the books, which I would definitely recommend by the way, is that morality is never black and white or green and red, it's always grey. It's a murky, unclear mixture of different elements of humanity, its needs, struggles, and dark history. And all of this births the various experiences that Geralt has to deal with in the franchise. He's a battering ram, a victim, and an observer of corrupt politics, the desperation of people in poverty and victims of racial discrimination, and furthermore, drug addiction, alcoholism, sexual assault, war, genocide, pandemics, Dandelion's terrible singing, and sexy vampires. It's definitely a heavy mix. Speaking of sex, Geralt is an absolute player in this game. There are 24 unique romance options in this game. It's just as well the mutagens preventing from catching any kind of STI. Alchemy is also very different in The Witcher compared to 2 and 3. Potions are more like long-term buffs than short-term boosts. For instance, the Swallow increases your health regeneration over a long period of time, rather than it like very quickly regenerating your health like it does in The Witcher 3. The same goes for other potions, they provide longer term buffs. Again, you can't drink too many without poisoning yourself, plus the ingredients of potions are very limited and you can't just refill them with alcohol. And because potions are more like buffs, this adds to the immersion because you have to physically prepare for a fight, rather than being able to drink potions in the middle of combat or eat 200 cheese wheels to keep yourself alive. Because realistically, even if there was such thing as like potions in real life, if you're in the middle of a fight, you wouldn't be able to just like quickly stop and drink one, would you? And if you do that in The Witcher 1, yeah, you're probably bang in trouble. You really have to pre-pop all of your potions, get all your buffs up before you go into a big fight. So The Witcher 1 is a very unique RPG experience that stands out when you compare it to most other RPGs. It hits harder because it's much darker and immersive compared to The Witcher sequels. The only issue that it has is it's nowhere near as fun to play as The Witcher 2 and 3. But it's still a unique charm to the game that is so powerful, I honestly prefer it over the other games. The game is really carried by its ability to create a compelling story and a world that I just simply get lost in. It barely even feels like playing a video game sometimes. It feels like more like watching a high-rated drama on Netflix or something. Definitely recommend trying to push through the game's awkward gameplay and weirdness. My advice is to just keep doing trackable quests and eventually you will progress through the game, and even if you play the game on easy, you should be able to get through it. If you're struggling with the combat, it is kind of like a pain in the backside to get used to, but once you get used to it, you realise it's actually really easy. But if you're struggling, just remember that Quen and potions are very overpowered. They are your friend. I might even make like a quick 5-minute beginner's guide video to help people get through it on my second channel. Anyway, my name is MetaGoblin. To my next video, ciao.